Hey everyone, it's Barry. I wanted to go through in a video and just sort of explain how simple an airbrush really is. That it's not complicated, there's nothing magical about an airbrush. It's a simple tool that if you know how to use it correctly, you can get a lot of really cool effects with it. You can really up your game in your miniature painting, and as long as you use it correctly, it's really not that difficult to keep it clean. There's a lot of clickbait, I like to call it, on YouTube, where people really just want to get you to click on their video. So they have to say, this is the newest, most amazing way to use your airbrush so it doesn't get clogged. You just got to put this special sauce in it. And that's not always true. So as I was doing this video to show how I did an OSL effect with the airbrush on an Age of Sigmar model, I realized it gave me a chance to talk about these things that I see in videos that really are just not true. People say you need to add these things, you need to add flow improver, you need to add Lamy and medium, you need to do specific things, and I never do that. And the reason I want to make this video is because I've been airbrushing a very, very long time. I got an airbrush when I was very young and started painting t-shirts immediately with acrylic paint. I did that for years and years, and I was pretty good. It's because I've always been kind of artistic. So I moved on with the airbrush and started painting through. There isn't probably a paint that I know of that I haven't sprayed through an airbrush. And I've sprayed entire cars with airbrush murals on them. I've done show cars, show motorcycles, signs, murals, you name it. I've done just about everything with an airbrush. And I've been airbrushing for over 33 years at the time of this video being made. So I know a lot of tricks, and I want you to all understand how basic and simple airbrushing can really be. So that's enough of me talking. Let's get to the video, and let me show you just how easy it can be. Alright, what I'm going to talk about today is airbrushing a miniature and how you do that. It's not super hard. I have a pretty good process that I've used for a really, really long time. So I just want to go through that process with you so you can maybe try it if you're having a little difficulty with getting your airbrush ready and thinning paints. So let's get started. Sorry, I never ever mix my paint in my airbrush cup. I don't do that. I don't like it. Some people do it. I don't do it. And I don't have issues. So I recommend you don't mix your paint inside the cup that's on top of your airbrush. I have an Iwata HP-C S that I'm using, and I also have a Mac valve on here to adjust my air pressure as I need it. So you might see there's some liquid in here. I just picked this thing up. When I finish cleaning my airbrush and I'm done with it, I always fill it up with Airbrush Cleaner. I'm using this Media Airbrush Cleaner. But I fill up this cup, or not fill it up, maybe halfway full, and then I just leave it in there when I walk away from it. And that helps me keep this cup. If there is any paint that's left down in there, this will keep it loose, limber. It won't harden up or block anything. So I just leave that in there to help between cleanings. So today what we're going to do is airbrush this guy from the bottom. He's going to be standing on a base where there's lava under him. So I'm just going to give him an up spray of some red and a little bit of orange, because the lava is going to be kind of like OSL coming up from the bottom. So move this guy aside. The first thing I need to do is get this cleaner out of my cup. So it's empty. There's still some cleaner in there. And that's part of the problem. Is that if you mix in this cup and you pour more than one thing in there, you're not really going to mix it like you think you are. If you look really close down in there, you could see my needle, and you could see there is a space around that needle, right? There's a cavity with a hole that needle goes through. And that hole, right, when you put stuff in there, it's going to go in that hole. And then if you put, let's say, some paint in there, it's going to go down in that hole, which is traveling down this needle, right? The needle's internally inside of here. It's traveling down that needle, and it stops right there at the nozzle, where the taper of the needle and the taper of the nozzle come together. Okay, so if I put some paint in there, it's going to run down there, and then I'm going to put some water, or I only use water to mix acrylics and thin them. If I put some water in here and then I try to stir it with my brush is not going down into this needle all the way to the end. It's only going to mix what's on top right here. And when your paint, some of these paints that we use for miniatures are so thick that when you try to spray them, they won't be able to atomize if they're too thick. So they'll come out in big goblets that come out, and it'll make like spots on your model. So you don't want that. Airbrush is like a really precise tool that is very good at atomizing paint to a very small particle. That's the whole purpose of using an airbrush. A rattle can does not do that. A rattle can has to mix everything and atomize right at that button you push down on top. And that button is terrible at atomizing paint because it's not expecting you to paint something this small, this close, right? It's expecting you to paint something that's a foot away. So for that reason, a rattle can will never have as good of a smooth transition as an airbrush, because an airbrush is just making the paint particles so tiny that they look smooth, right? Where a rattle can can't make those dots of paint very small. So you're always going to have this speckled look when you use a rattle can. There's no way around it. It doesn't matter how you heat it up, do whatever. Those things won't do anything because the tip of the can, that little plastic thing that the paint comes out of, it just can't atomize it as small as an airbrush can. So it's not, you're not going to get a smooth transition like an airbrush. So with that said, everything's out of here. Every time I change paint, I always take a paper towel, I stick it down in this cup, and I just twist it around to get everything off the sides, right? Because down in that well, I can't reach, but that, because of gravity, should just go down the needle. So now I can just spray, and you can hear the last of that come out. Now this brush is clear. I can put paint in there now. So this is how I mix paint. I have these that I bought at the store. You can buy them at large stores that carry consumer stuff like Sam's Club or Costco. You can find these little condiment cups is what they are. And this is what I get to mix paint in. So they all come with a lid, which is awesome, because if you mix paint and don't use it all, you can just put the lid on it and keep it. You can also use these lids. Here's a cup, right? So you can mix the paint inside this cup. It's clear, so you can see what the paint's doing from either side of this cup, inside or out. And then it comes with these little lids that pop on and seal. So they're not completely airtight, they're close. But your paint would stay decent in here for several days. So if you needed to stop an airbrush session, take a break, come back, go back to the paint, you'd have it already mixed in here and you could just pour it into your airbrush. You can also use the lids of these mixed cups. They don't have a split in them like for a straw or anything. So you can use these to mix paints too, because a lot of times I use way more of these cups than I do for these lids. But on the fly, you can use these to sort of mix up, use like metallics and things on here, and then just ditch this thing when you're done. That whole bag just cost a couple dollars. It was really cheap for all these. So I'm going to mix in this cup. I'm going to start with a darker red because OSL typically has a darker color the further you get away from the source, and a lighter color the closer you get to the source. So I'm just going to put, I don't need much, I just need a couple drops in here. There we go. That's plenty. Now, I always use one of these little squirt bottles when I airbrush. I use it all the time, honestly, but I use it when I airbrush because you can put pressure to it. So you can squeeze it and water comes out stronger, or you can just let it drip out like this. If I just tip it up, it just starts to drip a little bit. So I'm just going to put about roughly the same amount of water as it is paint in there to start. Then I'm going to use my handy dandy stir stick, which is also a pencil, and I'm going to tip this over so that all my water is in the bottom here, and I'm going to start dragging my paint in, mixing it up. Now see how right now when you look at that, you can see there's a difference between paint and water, right? That's thick right there. That's super thick. And this is the water down here. That's what happens when you mix in your cup. It does the same thing. The stuff that went in first, this thick paint, is all jammed down by the needle now. And when you mix, with your brush in the cup, that's exactly what you're doing. You're jamming all the paint down in that the body of the airbrush where the needle goes through. So don't do it. I don't do it. I don't recommend doing it. Alright, this paint looks pretty thin. It's pretty good. One way I check it is I'll just, while this is wet, I'll just tap it against the side over here, and if it runs down like that, try that again. I don't have the paint on here. Hold on. I can tap it, it kind of runs like that. It's pretty close. And see how it's getting transparent where it rolled away? That's a pretty good sign to me. I could probably go a little thinner with this, but it doesn't matter. I'm close enough. Another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is you don't just control your airbrush with the trigger. Okay? You control your airbrush several ways. One way is obviously the dual action trigger. Press this down, air comes out, pick it up, it stops. Then when you pull it down and pull it back, you can see this needle moving here because the body's exposed. See how that needle's moving back and forth in there? That needle travels through the body of the airbrush to the end where it's tapered, and there's also a tapered cone that it goes through, the nozzle. So as I move this needle back, I'm pulling the brush out of that nozzle that's at the same taper as the needle. So when it's closed like this, it's all the way forward, no paint can get out of here. Can't go anywhere. See how my air can still come out? That's because in the body of this airbrush, you can see this little piece that drops down. The air doesn't actually go in right here. The air goes through here, and it avoids where the paint is all the way up until right here. So literally when you paint, the paint that's in here falls down around the needle, it travels down the needle, and it goes to the nozzle. And then at the nozzle, just take this little cap off. Right? At the nozzle, all the paint and air comes together inside there. So if I take this one off, let me see if I can get it off my fingers. Put this one back on so I don't damage my needle tip. This has got to be tight. There we go. So inside the nozzle, if you take a look in here, you can see at the bottom, underneath where the needle comes out, hope you can see that. There's a hole right there, right? So if you look at it from the side, the paint is going to come out, and I'll show you how the needle moves. Get a little closer so you can see better. The needle moves in and out. Can you see it moving there? So I pull that back, the needle comes out and lets paint come through. But the air is coming out of that little hole right there under that. So it all mixes within this chamber right here to atomize it. Okay. Now this tip, a lot of people say, just take that thing off and don't use it, right? Just take this whole cap off. You don't need that. You don't need that nozzle cover thing. That's only to protect the needle. That is not completely true. This tip that comes past where all the atomization happens creates a Venturi effect that keeps this spray accurate and straight. So if you just take this off, unless you're painting a centimeter away, right, it's going to affect how your airbrush sprays. So just know that. If you're painting miniature like this guy, right, and you're getting very, very close, it won't matter if that cap's on. If I'm painting a tank and I'm holding it this far away, that will make a difference, okay? Also, speaking of distance, that's the other way that you control the spray of your airbrush. It's not just a simple fact of, you know, I know how to use a rattle can, I pointed at something, I spray. An airbrush is different because it's infinitely variable by this button right here and how much paint you're letting out of the needle. So if I press this down and air's coming out and then I pull it back, right, the more I pull this back, the bigger opening there's going to be for paint to go through right here where it mixes with the air. Okay? So as I'm pulling this back, I'm changing the amount of paint that's coming out, right? But the more paint that comes out, you also need to be aware of how far your nozzle is from the surface. So if you want to paint something really tiny, like a little hairline, you can get super duper close and then barely pull back this trigger, and a little tiny amount of paint will come out of there and it'll look like a hairline. But if I'm this close to something and I pull this trigger all the way back, so much paint's going to come out at this distance, it's just going to spider out everywhere. It's going to make a mess. So you constantly have to be aware of how close you are to something while you're painting. That'll make all the difference, because you don't want to put too much paint on the surface, it'll run. But if you're not close enough, you'll just get a little light dusting of it on there. So you have to also adjust your distance from the surface and the trigger amount that you're using to get a good spray. And then the third thing you have to control is the consistency of your paint, because your paint will make a difference how it atomizes on the end of this needle. I think ours is pretty good right now. Let me just give it one more quick stir. I don't need much. I'm going to pour it in this cup. Okay. Now I've got paint in there and it's already mixed. And it's the exact same mix down here at the nozzle as it is up here in the cup. So when I start spraying, it won't change on me as I'm spraying. Always put your cap on, because I tend to turn my hand around to get the things and turn the miniature to get the right angles of stuff. And if you're not careful, you'll just pour it right out of the cup and it goes everywhere and makes a big mess. So I am ready to spray. And what I'm going to do, I wear a glove on my left hand because I airbrush with my right hand. And instead of using a holder, I typically just use my hand as a holder. So this way I don't get paint all over my hand. It's not a big deal if you do. You just have to like wash your hands and your fingernails are painted for a while. But other than that, it's not a big deal. So I did a zenithal prime on this guy from the top. So you can see if you look at him from the top, he looks mostly white. Turn him over, it looks mostly black. So where it's black, I want that OSL to come up. So I'm just going to start painting. And never start with your airbrush pointed directly at the model. Always start spraying with the model out of the way so you can see what you're going to get. All right, see the paint coming out of there? See it? And this is very important too. Watch my finger when I spray. See how I'm just rocking that trigger back and forth? That's how you keep from tip drying. Because remember, this paint is just rolling down this needle. It's gravity fed, right? So you have to hold the brush at an angle. You see how the cup's made at an angle? You have to hold it this way in your hand because you need the paint to go down the needle. It's gravity fed. So when you're spraying, paint's coming out around your needle and the tip right there constantly. And as soon as it comes out, the air catches it and it blows it out. It atomizes it into tiny little droplets. If you're spraying, right, and you're doing this rocking motion, and then you just let go. Right now, because the needle slammed shut and no air was there, there's a blob of paint right here on the end of the needle. Let's see if I can show you. See how much paint's right there? And watch what happens when I just pull the trigger back. I'm not gonna, or push the trigger down, just air. Right? It blows it off. But if you don't rock it so that the air is constantly moving all the paint at your tip away from the tip, right, then it's just going to dry right there and clog up the brush. Number one thing that clogs your brush tip is not having good trigger control. That's it. Always start with needle or the trigger all the way forward, then rock the trigger, and then when you're done painting, stop and hold the trigger down all the way forward so it gets all the paint off the end of that nozzle. Number one problem with tip dry is not controlling that trigger correctly. The other one is your paint's too thick. Okay, so I'm going to paint this guy from the bottom. So all I'm going to do is turn him so the airbrush is pointing directly at the bottom of him, and the lava is going to be in front of him. I'm trying to get my hands out of the way so I don't block any spots that the lava OSL would hit. And then I'm just going to start laying in some reds in there. And I'm just rocking that trigger back and forth real light. I'm barely pulling it back because I can see how much paint's coming out. And I don't want to go crazy. I don't want him to have a ton of paint. Just light, smooth, thin layers to get this effect. Very, very thin. Very thin. You can see I'm hitting all the spots where light from below would be reflecting up on here. Right. Real thin paints, nothing too crazy. And then this staff he's got, I'm going to get that too, because it's facing down towards the lava. Now this guy's going to be all non-metallic metal, gold, right, everywhere. So this is kind of a guide coat. It doesn't have to be perfect. You might say, you know what, Barry, that doesn't really look very bright like lava, but it doesn't matter because it's just my spot to tell me that's where those reflections should be. So I'll paint over probably 90% of what I've done when I do the colors and everything. But this tells me where everything should be. That's the correct lighting for the way this guy's going to be set up. Right? Pretty simple. Now I'm going to change this color. I'm done with the red. So let me show you how to do that. So I've got paint in here. I've got paint everywhere, right? See? I've used very little paint. I still have a ton left. So what I'm going to do is I could either take this paint, I'll just show you. Like if I'm going to use this paint later, I could just put it right back in the cup. I'm just going to dump it out, right? Okay. Now I can just put the lid on that cup. If I need to do touch-ups later, I could come back, spray that out. Now this isn't important because I didn't mix anything in this paint. I just used straight paint. But if I had mixed 2-3 colors together, it'd be extremely important to keep that if you thought you might need to do some touch-ups later. Now, I need to change the paint in this. Well, this is what I do. This thing's full of paint. A lot of guys will say, I just fill it up with water. Just dump a bunch of cleaner in there and spray it through. No, but why would you do that? I can easily get this paint out with this paper towel right now. Just to stick it in there. I'm going to wipe it really good. And look at all the paint I got out. I don't have to push through. Got some on the side right here. Just clean that off. All right. Still some in there, the sides of the cup. So just jam this paper towel in there, twist it. And look, I got almost all the paint out of there. It's just a little bit in the bottom. So the next thing I would do is take this water bottle we're talking about. And because I can squeeze it in a pressure. And I'm going to put it in there and I'm going to squeeze it to try to get that paint moving, right? I didn't use much. This cup's not even full right now. Now, I'm going to spray all this paint out into a paper towel like this. This is just water. I'm not using anything magical or chemical or anything. Acrylic is a water-based paint. It doesn't require chemicals to do anything. All right, we'll keep going until this cup's empty. Alright, cup's empty, right? There's still some paint down in there. Water. More water. I'm going to keep spraying this so I don't really see color anymore. Because I have another color to do. I'm going to do some orange on this guy too to give him a little more pizzazz. Okay. So keep getting all that on there. And you see there's still a little bit of color down in there, right? But we're also going to use another color. So this time I'm doing orange. I'm going to put a little bit of water in here while I mix my second color so that paint that's in there can't really dry. It's submerged now in water. I'm just going to put this on my airbrush stand. And now I'm going to mix up my orange. By the way, the first red I used was just Vallejo model color red. Second color is Citadel Blazing Orange, which I don't know if they make this anymore. I've got some old pots, so. Just need a couple drops in there. Very little. That's good. I'm going to put about the same amount of paint in there. Okay. Use my pencil again. Stir that up together. Remember, the more you thin this paint, the more you're separating the pigment in it. It's further and further apart. So the more you thin it, the thinner the color's gonna look. Put another drop in there. So if I'm trying to do a light color over a dark color, I might not want to get too crazy with thinning it down because it may take more coats and I'll lose vibrancy. But for this model, we just want to get it to the point where it'll spray through the airbrush okay. Put a drop on the side. It's still a little thick, but that's okay because I kind of want it to be opaque. I don't want it to be thin, right? All right, go back in my airbrush. I'll spray all this out. This water. Well, it's just water. It's not going to hurt anything if it's still in there. All right, wipe that out. So I'll have a bunch of paint in there, or water in there. Unmixed with my paint. Spray it, make sure I don't get anything coming out of the airbrush. It's empty. I'll put this orange in here. I can get it to come out. There we go. Okay. Now we are ready to do the orange coat. Remember, never start spraying directly at your model. Always start off by not being at your model. Just rocking the trigger. I see the orange coming out right there. I'm going to grab this guy in a way I don't block any details. And now I'm just going to keep this brighter orange closer to the bottom of the model, because that's where, if he's closer to the lava, that's where there would be more glow. Just rocking the trigger, rocking it, building up that orange paint. Not trying to get too high on the model. Okay, boom, OSL. Doop. I'm going to put a little bit on his staff. Give it a little more pop. I'm just barely rocking this trigger. You can see how slow that paint's coming out when I'm spraying it. There you go. From the bottom, from the front. Easy peasy. Now I know where all that should go. Now I could have painted this whole model and then done that OSL, and it would have looked perfect. It would have looked really good, right? Fully painted, and then you just got the OSL from the airbrush. But I plan on doing this whole guy in gold NMM, so I just need a foundation. Like where it's on the robes and stuff, that just gives me a good idea where to glaze it back in while I'm painting the robes. But on his armor, right, I'll be able to leave some of it, but it's easier for me to paint NMM around this glow, so I know where it's supposed to be, than it is to do full NMM, which is very reflective, and then put this just solid color on it, because that doesn't really read right on a reflective surface. It does on the clothes, like it's perfect for the robe and stuff, but it won't look the same on the metal parts. Some people just do it, but to me it's not really right. So anyway, now I got this dirty airbrush. So there's some paint still in there, so I go back to my paper towel, stick my finger in there and wipe that cup out. Get all the paint out of there that I can with this paper towel. There's no sense in blasting that through the airbrush when it's still on the surface up here. Okay, got most of it out. Now I'm going to blast it with water. And then I'm going to start spraying that out. Be really careful with this part because I'm blasting paint out of this thing. It's really watered down, but you can see it's still paint in there. And my model's right there. So be careful where usually you should move your model as far away as possible so you don't have to think about it. But you know, after a lot of years, you learn to just kind of block your model with your hand so nothing gets over there. But my advice is move it to a totally different area once you're ready to clean, so you don't get any of the spray. I'm just blasting this through the needle all the way back. You see my cup's almost empty. All right. Look, if you look in there, it's really it's not that dirty. It's just not. Now I'm going to put a little more water in there. Keep working that. And this time I am going to move my model because I'm going to use this paper towel under me. Get this last part out. Now, I have not worn a mask for this. I really don't believe you need a mask. Acrylic paints are not toxic. You can see that's almost completely clean. If I just wipe it with a paper towel right now, I'd get everything out of there. Acrylic is not toxic. Water is not toxic. That's all that's coming out of this airbrush right now. So I don't really need to be worried about my lungs or anything like that. Airbrush atomizes paint so well, and it's so tiny that it will just dry before it gets more than a foot away. It's that simple. But a lot of people want to be really careful. So what I do is once I've got this cleaned out, I just use water. I got it 99% clean. That's all I've done. Right? Is I take my filter, my filtered spray bottle here that you put the airbrush in. I check my needle real quick, see if I got any buildup on there. It looks orange. You tell me, do you see buildup there? No, you do not. There is no buildup. Why? Because I used the trigger correctly. I rocked it back and forth. I didn't let any paint build up on the end of the needle there. Now you can argue that some paints are thicker than others, and that is true. White is a very thick paint and it will clog up faster no matter what you do. So I don't use white acrylic paint in an airbrush. If I need to spray paint white, I use white acrylic ink. Ink has a much more diluted, thin property, even though it has as much or more pigment in it, and you just have to build up more layers of it with the airbrush instead of just trying to blast regular acrylic white through it. So for this last step, when I'm totally done with the airbrush, I'm about to walk away. Like I said, this is 99% clean. I could walk away from it right now, honestly. I wouldn't need to do anything more. But I always take this airbrush cleaner, not thinner, cleaner, and I put some in the top here. I put some in here, and like I showed you before, I'm going to leave it in there, right? So I've got that not quite, it's about halfway full. I'm going to spray a little bit through it just to get it down the needle. And then I'm just going to put the cap on this thing. And I'm going to put it right back into the stand. Now, if you were worried about fumes, this is the time you would worry about it. This is not water, right? Even though it says it's environmentally safe and odorless and everything, right? And it says it's proven safe, no harmful fumes or irritating odors. It does have an odor. It does, let's face it. And it kind of tickles your throat if you breathe it. So you can put it in this. This is a filter, right? If you look inside here, that's filter. You can see it's colored even. So when you put this on, and then you spray inside this, it's filtering all that out. Boom, done. So if you're worried about anything, worry about the cleaners, not the paint or the water, okay? And spray it inside this jug instead of out onto your paper towels. And that's it. That's how I airbrush. Very simple. My airbrush right now, the pressure from my compressor is set to, I think, 20 pounds. But really, I just kind of want to show you that this doesn't have to be a pain. Now, I know some of you don't have an airbrush place where you can go, or in my workshop right now, I never put it away. This is where it belongs, this is where it stays. I'm very lucky to have a space like that, and not everybody does. Some people have to, drag out the airbrush when they want to airbrush a miniature because they're painting at their dining room table. And that makes things harder. I get it. And, you don't want your wife or kids or partner or anybody else to have to breathe that. They might not like breathing anything. They might be worried about what they're breathing in. So, it's a little tougher in those situations. So the point of this video, though, is just showing you a lot of people will say airbrushing is annoying and they clog up and they're a disaster and they don't even know why they bought them and things like that. But I just wanted to show you real quick, as I did some steps on this model, that airbrushing is not as difficult as some people might say. It's just not. I got a lot of tips for people. Like I said, I've been airbrushing for over 30 years. That airbrush I use right now is over 20 years old. But I've maintained it and took care of it, and it still works perfectly today, just like it would when you first got out of the box. So don't be intimidated by airbrushing. Yes, it is helpful. Yes, it's an extra tool in your painting toolbox that can do certain things very well. Don't pass up on airbrushing. If you have the ability to get one, you will be able to use it. You just have to use it wisely and listen to tips from people like me that have been doing it a really long time. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something from this video. Also want to state that this is not a deep clean of the airbrush. This is just how I change colors, and when I don't do a lot of airbrushing and my airbrush is still pretty clean, you just can leave the cleaner in the cup overnight, and then eventually though, like about once a week or so, if you're using your airbrush pretty regular, I would do a complete tear down and clean the entire airbrush. And I'll do another video about how I handle that and the steps I do to complete that at a later date. Again, please like, subscribe, add a comment if there's anything in here that you don't agree with, that you do agree with, anything that might have helped you, let me know. And any suggestions for future videos or anything related to miniature painting that I can help with, I will definitely post a video if you request it. So I'll catch you in the next one.